Welcome back to Hardware Unboxed. We're continuing the March Q&A session in our Human Malware Quarantine Special Edition. So we still have over here Monitor Steve. How you doing?
Still doing well. Hanging in there.
Yep, seems this setup has been working surprisingly well throughout filming for the past hour or so. So yeah, it's been all good. Smooth sailing, which is nice. Skype's holding up, which is a big surprise for Skype. And yeah, we've got more Patreon questions. You guys who have signed up to our Patreon page and left some questions in our Discord chat, we're going to be getting through most of those questions. Some really good questions this month. Yeah, not much more to say. If you've missed the first two parts, which will be the YouTube questions, go back and watch those, and let's just get into it. So first question, with the March 5th AMD presentation imminent, what are your expectations regarding a big Navi and or NVIDIA killer announcement? Also, what kind of performance would you both like to see from a high-end RDNA 2 GPU? I mean, we've spoken a lot about this through various different things, Patreon live streams, all that sort of thing. Don't really have too many expectations regarding these sort of things, except for it's going to be faster. I expect NVIDIA to have quite a substantial performance jump because they'll be jumping from 12 to probably a 7 nanometer node, so you'd expect big things there. Big Navi we've already seen and talked a lot about in some of the past Q&As, the console-related stuff, so more compute units, higher clocks, better performance, ray tracing, all that sort of thing. So those are just your basic expectations. I think everyone's sort of expecting that sort of stuff. What kind of performance would you both like to see from high-end RDNA 2? I mean, again, there's something
competitive.
There's something we've talked about a lot. It has to be competitive and not just like 2080 Ti level. Like 2080 Ti level is minimum. Like it has to be significantly faster than that because they're going to be competing with the 7 nanometer NVIDIA GPU that's going to be faster. So yeah, they're going to have to beat that by quite a substantial amount, I would have thought. So, and that's no easy task. The 5700 XT is quite far behind. So yeah, should be possible, but
yeah, there'll be no NVIDIA killer announcement. They're like a year and a half behind at this point at least. So it'll be a catcher-upper type announcement at best. All right, next question. Why are so many people concerned about right motherboard for my 3600/3700X if basically any board will do the job? Both CPUs have 88 watts power max, so there's no motherboards which can't tolerate this power consumption. Right, okay, so it's one of those future-proofing type scenarios that make sense. You can actually future-proof for. So if you buy a pretty garbage AM4 motherboard that really only supports these 65-watt TDP parts but when you get up to the sort of 105-watt TDP parts, the VRMs start to overheat and throttle, and you don't get the sort of performance you should out of those higher-end parts, then that's not ideal. So it's basically people are worried about getting the right motherboard now, so they don't have to buy another motherboard when they want to buy a second-hand 3900X or 3950X. That's basically what it's all about. And that's why certain X570 motherboards were so disappointing, because they didn't support those CPUs as easily as they should have.
What are your thoughts on current 5700 XT performance, and do you think when Big Navi is released, there will be a big performance jump from it? So I'm not quite sure whether you mean, do you think the 5700 XT will get a performance jump when Big Navi is released, or whether Big Navi is the performance jump that's coming from it? So I guess we've already talked about what we expect from Big Navi.
Yeah, well, the current 5700 XT performance is good. It's very competitive in terms of performance. There were the driver issues that they're still working through, but I think they've mostly solved. But in terms of performance, very competitive at the current price point, which is why people got somewhat excited about it.
Yeah, I think that still remains true, and I can't expect that, if you did mean the other situation where, if Big Navi comes out, that maybe the 5700 XT would get a performance bump. I don't see how that would happen. I think that the drivers would just be as optimized as ever. It would be pretty rare to see that sort of thing happen. All right, what type of keyboard do you have, Tim and Steve? Do you prefer a certain type of switch in your keyboard? So what are you using at the moment?
Well, I typically use mechanical keyboards. Cherry MX switches are quite good, and I usually opt for the brown switches. I quite like the feel of those.
Okay, yeah, I'm more of a red fan. I like the linear actuation, so no click. They're just linear.
Yeah, I like red as well.
Yep.
I'm not a big fan of the blue ones.
Yeah, I find the clicky ones to be too loud. Like the linear one is loud-ish, but certainly the other ones tend to be like obnoxious. And with the streaming setup that we've got here for our live streams, I think these use maybe not a cherry, but definitely one with quite a noticeable click, and not a huge fan. So, but the red's really good.
All right, next one. Steve and Tim, how do you decide which games to benchmark for the Mega 30 Plus blue bar graphs? Is it based on popularity, feedback from the community, or a general mix of engines, DirectX 12/11/Vulkan? And with so many things changing and being optimized, how do you adapt? Okay, so first part of that question, basically we're just adding new-ish popular games that are demanding either on the CPU or the GPU as they come in, and then older games or games that are no longer popular or just not that great for testing hardware get dumped. That happens sometimes. It's kind of based on a bit of everything. We have some games that are there purely because they're popular, some because, a bit of both really, feedback from the community. So there's often games that you guys want to see included, like PUBG, Fortnite, Rainbow Six Siege is one that's always heavily requested, so that'll be in there for a long time to come. That's sort of a community game, and not really the game engines and not really the APIs. It's really more of just it's a popularity thing, community feedback, and then does it do something new or unusual, and therefore it makes it interesting to test because maybe we think it's sort of giving us an insight into how future games will perform. So there's a whole heap of factors there. And then for the optimization, sort of how do we adapt question, well, that's just a whole lot of benchmarking, really. So quite often we'll throw all our results out and start over because there's new drivers or, big game patches that change performance a lot. For example, Rainbow Six Siege, all our older results were thrown out because the game now supports Vulkan and went through a major update. Same thing with Fortnite. Those results are thrown out very often for Fortnite. Just we adapt by doing a hell of a lot of benchmarking.
Given that we have 16-core, 32-thread CPUs on the consumer side now, and clock speeds are likely to be mostly tapped out, do you think that we're in for a boring period in the CPU industry with only small IPC improvements, especially while Intel struggles to get their process technology sorted out? It's hard to say. It sounds like from what AMD is attempting with Zen 3 that they're still hoping for significant IPC gains. Mm-hmm. So it's not necessarily a situation where there'll only be small IPC improvements, but I wouldn't be expecting another, Zen Plus to Zen 2 situation. There's certainly things they can do. Depends how much they're going to get. We just don't know. But yeah, I would certainly think on the core count side that's kind of where it's going to be for now, at least. The only question there is sort of what is the pricing going to be? Is it going to be, the 6-core parts are going to become your $100 parts and then everything else gets shifted down? Will we see a cheaper than $750 16-core part? I'd hope so. But I think that's more where we'll see the competition in the short term, is sort of on that pricing stuff.
Yeah, I think we're a fair way off a boring period, let's say. We've gone through a fairly extensive, boring, mainstream quad-core period. I think we're quite a way off that happening. AMD have told us multiple times they're pushing hard. They've got a lot of advancements to make still, so I think we're in for a few more years of interesting things. And then Intel has a lot of interesting technologies that they've sort of shown and talked about. So I think once they sort out their process technology, there'll be some really exciting things from Intel. They'll have a big push, and it'll just continue on. So I don't think any boring stuff will be happening anytime soon.
Taking a flagship card like a 2080 Ti as a reference, how much faster does it need to be before PCIe 3.0 x 16 isn't enough? And what's the biggest impact on PCIe bandwidth needs? Is it VRAM capacity, VRAM speed, GPU speed, or is it something else?
As for when we're going to saturate the PCIe 3.0 x 16 bus just for general sort of usage on a high-end card, honestly not sure on that one. We'll have to see what the next generation does. I'd say there's still a bit of headroom there, but of course it depends on things, as you say, with like VRAM capacity. We've seen some good examples with the 5500 XT, though that wasn't times 16 bandwidth. It was times 8 bandwidth. So, but yeah, if you're running out of VRAM capacity, obviously the PCIe bandwidth plays a role there. So that's probably in the short term situations where you would see it saturated. VRAM speed, not so much. GPU speed, well, yeah, we don't know how much GPU performance you need before that interface, no longer is sufficient. So very hard to say on that one. We'll just have to wait and see with new generations of GPUs. And generally we do like a PCIe bandwidth test every generation or so. So we'll see what happens.
Yeah, I think it would depend a bit on how the game works as well. Because I think for example, there's a 3D Mark test that you can run that shows the advantages of PCIe 4.0 for current gen cards, but games these days don't actually make use of that. It wouldn't make a lot of sense considering how few people have access to PCIe 4.0. So as it becomes more useful, then game developers might start using those features more, in which case it'll become more of an issue. So that's another big factor. Given your DLSS 1.9 video, when do you think you'll compare NVIDIA's improved DLSS to AMD's Radeon Boost? I'm aware of the differences between both performance boosting algorithms, but would definitely like to see a head-to-head benchmark to see which of the two methods is superior in practice. Well, it's kind of hard to test both those things at the same time because there's no game that supports both DLSS and Radeon Boost at the moment. Both of those require per-game support, and there's just no overlap there at the moment. So it's hard to say how much of a performance gain you get between those two things. But from what I've seen, DLSS is the far superior method, as in the new version of DLSS, not the old version, because that was not very good. The new version, DLSS 2.0, that we've seen in Wolfenstein Youngblood and has now come to Control and one other game, I think. So that is definitely better, just from what I've seen. It gives you better image quality, better performance boost. The Radeon Boost thing's okay, but sort of when you move your mouse around a lot and you're looking around quite quickly, I found it at least somewhat noticeable. The resolution drops because the idea there was that it renders at a higher resolution when you're not moving, and then when you start moving around, it lowers the resolution. But I found, especially on those higher resolutions, it can be quite jarring, the resolution difference and jumps. So I think with DLSS is more consistent image quality and pretty substantial performance gains, that is sort of the better technique out of those two. I don't think it'll necessarily need a head-to-head to sort of, show that sort of thing.
All right, next question. I know this is a bit of a past story, but I recently delitted my 8700K and was completely shocked by how much thermals improved. Got more than 30 degrees improvements under heavy loads. So how come Intel just didn't bother to use better thermal solution in their chips for so long? Couldn't they have just sold a cooler, better overclocking? Maybe made a better overclocking SKU for more price by simply using better thermal compound. Okay, so yeah, they were heavily criticized for using their, what was sort of called the Intel dodgy thermal paste type solution in their high-end chips for so long. Then they ended up soldering the chips, and in some ways that was worse for overclockers because you still got a big temperature drop by delitting and using sort of for your own methods, whether that was liquid metal or whatever. So the reason why they haven't done it is, costs really. It's just cheaper and easier to use the paste that they did on your particular chip than it is to solder them. And then soldering has other pitfalls. Sometimes they have to change a few things about the height of the chip and the silicon and stuff like that to avoid cracking and whatnot. So it's just it seems to be a challenging process for Intel to get right. But surely they can do better than what they've done so far. But I think it's just managing those costs there and try not to cut too much into their margins.
Yeah, and aren't there question marks as well over some of those, thermal solution, like the liquid metal type stuff doesn't last as long as, say, a thermal paste or solder would inside a chip?
Yes. Yeah, there is. I haven't really seen any hard evidence of that sort of stuff, and we haven't done any testing ourselves. But yes, there's longevity sort of concerns, I suppose. And then soldering, there was all concerns about, if it's too thin, it cracks over time and stuff like that. But I don't know. AMD seems to be pretty well on top of that. From what I've seen, delitting their chips, while it's still, obviously it's very difficult with soldered chips, but it will give you a smallish performance improvement, but it's not worth doing, whereas with Intel it's still worth doing. So yeah, guys like DeBauer do a lot of cool content on that, so it's probably worth checking out his channel for all that information. I haven't really kept up on the sort of dealing in the AMD chips, but to my knowledge, it's not really worth doing.
Will you be attending LMG's Live Expo? Like you, I'm in Australia, so I won't be going, but I'd love to see you do content with Gamers Nexus, among others. Linus has been putting it out to creators that, he's assisting creators and all that sort of thing. We get asked this question a fair bit. I think people have suggested to, the LTX Twitter account and that sort of thing that we should attend. We haven't heard much on that, but also kind of we've got this human malware situation, and so that stuff's kind of all up in the air. I think both of us have said in the past it would be great to attend the show at some point, but maybe this year isn't quite the year for people to be doing significant international travel for something like that.
All right, next question here. Is CCX overclocking still a thing? Steve, is this something you have tested? Say if you're using a 3950X for gaming and streaming and you're able to get 4 cores running at 4.7 gigahertz or higher for the game and the rest stock for streaming and everything else. Is this something viable? Yeah, it is. I think it's probably the best method. We haven't done too much looking into it, let's say. I don't have too much more information to give on it. It seems like the best method to use. How significant the gains are, though, hard to say whether it's worth it or not. And yeah, it's a sort of a tedious approach to overclocking. I think in general, sort of like 3950X and 3rd-gen Ryzen overclocking's not terribly beneficial, but yeah, possibly worth looking into if tinkering and overclocking's what interests you.
One thing I've always wondered, I've built computers for years, but it seems like the way you connect cases to motherboards is pretty much the same. And I would have thought by now we would have perhaps wireless connections from cases to motherboards, except perhaps for a power cable or something that would have just come along that is better. Is that something that's ever been brought up with case and motherboard manufacturers?
So do they mean like front panel I/O?
I think maybe they mean that. Maybe they mean sort of your SATA connections as well, so storage connections and all that sort of thing. Because I would have thought that the reason why they haven't gone wireless is that there's so many complications introduced with sort of, having a front panel connectors being Bluetooth or some other wireless connection or wireless USB or whatever the situation is, that it's just not as good. And you were talking about a PC where the components in there are all static. Like they're all just sitting in there doing their thing. There's no reason why you can't run a wire. Sure, it might make the building process easier if it was all wireless, but like the trade-offs would be massive there. What if it doesn't work? Like a lot of wireless stuff doesn't. And you're just not moving it around. So
yeah, it needs software to connect to things, and obviously bandwidth is just the main limiting factor there.
Yeah.
And it's not practical or makes any kind of sense because you're not moving your motherboard independently from your case. As Tim says, they're going in one box. So whenever that's the situation, running wires is always the optimal solution. You really only make things wireless when they need to be separate from one another. And that certainly isn't the case with your case and the components in it. I'm buying a GPU, a graphics card, and I want to know if these upgraded models are worth that much more than the basic card. So the EVGA Black versus For the Win 3 and everything in between. Straight gaming, VR, not an overclocker, install and play. Thanks. So I did a video on this a little while ago on the channel. I think it was with an RTX 2060 series graphics card. I'll have to go back and find out. But basically I tested, I think it was maybe an Asus base model against their most premium model. So maybe like a Tough versus Strix, something like that. And we looked at quite a few different RTX 2060 cards, I believe. And yeah, in terms of performance, you're obviously looking at pretty much the same thing. That's always been the case. The 5600 XT is probably the only exception in recent time where there could be up to a sort of 10% performance difference, but you can also manual overclock and flash and do all that kind of stuff to make that up. So generally, the higher end models just run cooler and quieter and maybe have a bit more overclocking headroom, but even then that's a bit sus because you can just, if you're willing to put up with a bit more noise, the lower end ones should overclock just as well. There's obviously binned GPUs and memory components that can go into the higher end ones, but generally no, it's not worth spending more money on the higher end cards. If it's $10 for a better cooler, or maybe even $20 depending on how much the base price is, then yeah. But like 5700 XTs, let's say $400, buying the more premium models that are up around $500 just don't make sense. At that point, you'd be better off getting a 2070 Super. Given how cheap certain 5700 XT models like the TUF have become in some regions, could they be good candidates for high performance aftermarket air coolers, or are the compatibility issues that would prevent this? So in the case of the TUF, I don't believe there is any, certainly not water blocks. Arctic make like there's an Accelerode type cooler that can go on there. It's a bit fiddly. You got to not really wrapped on the, putting the little heat sinks and stuff on the GDDR6 memory chips and the VRM and all that. It's a bit fiddly. And I think those coolers are still like at least $50 US. Perhaps I'm wrong on that. But generally, you're just better off, and you avoid your warranty and all that kind of stuff. You're better off just spending, if it was $50 more, let's say, from the TUF to, I don't know, one of the good quality 5700 XTs that we reviewed, you'd be better off just buying that, because you don't have to fiddle around with it, you don't have to touch it, you don't have to buy any aftermarket cooling or anything. Just slot it in and away you go. So yeah, I'd avoid the TUF at all costs. The upcoming TUF Evo, that might be worth buying. We'll check that out when it's available.
Given that the pressure to beat Intel isn't as significant for AMD now, do you think that AMD will be more honest about performance and boost clock claims this time around? It's interesting because I think they were honest as it is. Yeah. I think a lot of people were, I wouldn't say maybe confused is the right word to use here, but certainly AMD has always advertised the boost clock as a maximum clock speed, and the maximum clock speed is the maximum. It's not they don't mean the single core. We've talked about all of this before, but it's not like the guaranteed when you're running a one core application, this is what it's going to run at or whatever. It's just, it goes up to this speed. And that was obviously confusing for people because Intel did something different. So,
yeah, sure. They were obviously very honest about the performance. Like, were there any dubious sort of performance claims made for third?
No.
I don't think so. So I think the performance they were very upfront and honest about. And yeah, the boost clock thing, it was a bit iffy to begin with because some people were missing on a 2550 or worse sort of megahertz performance. But as I sort of suggested at the time, it seemed, having tested a wide range of motherboards, that it was probably down to the motherboard BIOSes or the AGESA code that needed to be updated to better support the new boost algorithm. And once they did that, I think it was AGESA version 1.0.0.4 maybe on the AM4 socket. Anyway, once they did that, or was that the ABBA one? I can't remember. Doesn't matter. They solved it, and as they advertise, depending on the workload for lightly threaded tasks, this will be the maximum achieved boost clock.
Yeah, it was such a negligible thing anyway between what people were seeing and what they should have.
It didn't change performance.
So
yeah,
I think they'll go about everything as normal. All right, we've got a final question here. This is an interesting one. I've always wondered how dusty your recording setups are in the background. Given that I've seen other YouTubers show how much dust and cobwebs gather in the background out of reach of the camera focus, could you show how dusty yours is? I could probably get something off it. Well, we could have a look at the dust level.
I have a little. This was a perfect opportunity to slot in one of those vacuum cleaner ad spots.
Oh yeah.
But no, I have a little vacuum cleaner with a little sort of dust nozzle thing, and I just go around and quickly suck up any dust every now and then. So mine's fairly clean. I clean it from time to time, so not too bad.
So this is a Z390 Aorus Master Box. I think it's been on my set for a while now, probably a few years, and there actually isn't that much dust on it. I think there's like a little bit on the back, but yeah, it's not super dusty. It's actually surprisingly not that dusty.
I think what helps us a lot is that our sort of studio areas where we are right now as we speak, we don't work in these per se. Like I've got a benchmark lab upstairs. Tim has you've got the same thing upstairs in your place as well now, don't you? So we do the majority, I would say over 90% of our time is spent in a separate room. And there I do a lot of vacuuming on a weekly basis. But in here, because we don't spend a whole lot of time in here, it's not it's not as messy, not as bad.
Yeah, it's not as much opportunity for dust to sort of get in. So even if I look over like some of the Lego and stuff that I have around here that's been around for a while, it's all pretty clean, surprisingly clean. So yeah, not that dusty.
All right, well, that is it from Monitor Steve on this one, this 3-part series. Hopefully we'll have real life Steve sitting next to Tim and give him a hard time in a month's time, but I don't think so. It'll probably be a few more months of this. But anyway, we're able to make it happen. Unfortunately, I've got horrendous hay fever at the moment, so sorry if I've been sniffing a bit through this. I've been really trying not to, but yeah, it's been a bit difficult. Anyway, my challenges.
Yep, it's all going well.
But yeah, hopefully this all came out pretty well and it wasn't too much of a disruption to our monthly Q&A series.
Yeah, I think it's worked well, surprisingly well.
Yeah, I mean, as always, thank you to everyone who asked questions on the YouTube community tab, all our lovely Patreon members. Yeah, it's been fun as usual.
Yeah, it's been good. So, yeah, as always, don't forget to go back and watch the part 1 and 2 if you've missed it. The YouTube questions are all in there. Obviously, we've got all our usual stuff like subscribing, liking the video. We've got the Patreon, as we've mentioned before, so you can ask these Patreon questions. Links to that are in the description below, and you get access to everything, live streams that we've just done, and all that sort of thing. And there's not much else to say. I'll have to put Monitor Steve away in a moment. We'll cover him up and bring him back for next month, perhaps, and hopefully all this will work again and be fine. I'll be
sitting in the corner of Tim's studio monitoring the dust build-up.
Yeah, that's pretty much it.
The next month.
But I think, maybe we'll swap out the monitor for next time. We'll give you a bit of a different look next month. You get a bit of a style change.
Makeover.
Yeah, that's right.
Oh, lovely. That's what I need.
All right, I think that's it. That's it for this month.
So, thanks for watching. Yep. I'm your host, Steve.
I'm your host, Tim, and we'll see you.